Hello, fellow bookworm. Welcome back to Frat Stuff's Book. It's a place for nerds who like words. In today's episode, we're going to take a trip down into Victorian era London. Are you excited? Let's get going. Gaslight Mysteries by Victoria Thompson. I'm a firstborn in my family. My sister is 9 years younger than me. So I pretty much grew up as a single child in my formative. That meant I was a teeny tiny bit spoiled, but it also meant I learned to keep myself busy. And one of the ways that I did that was poring over books. I was lucky that growing up I had access to all sorts of books. One of my aunts, I have six of them, so I had a pretty wide variety to choose from. But one of my aunts, she ran a private library, and I devoured literally everything that came to its doors. Comic books, weekly magazines, women's magazines, sports magazines, to novels. And I quickly realized that I loved reading mysteries, specifically detective stories. Of course, in due time, I met the world's most favorite detective, Sherlock Holmes. But even before Holmes, I knew I liked solving puzzles. Sifting through clues, trying out scenarios in my head, trying to find the killer before the end of the novel. Over the years, I have read a lot of detective stories. Some good, some bad, some really great. Police and murder mysteries, I literally have read them set in all sorts of settings. Modern, futuristic, sci-fi, old school. In the same quest to find some interesting murder mysteries, I recently ran across a historical fiction novel with the title Murder on Astor Place, written by Victoria Thompson. Now, Murder on Astor Place is a beginning of a very long series of books that Victoria Thompson has written. It's a story that is set in late 1800s, proper Victorian era, and it begins with Sarah Bragg. Now, she's a widowed midwife. She's lost her husband, who used to be a doctor, and now she's managing to earn her own living by being a midwife. Now, we meet her when she's being summoned to a rooming house in New York City in 1896, I think. As she's working, she meets a young girl who is also a tenant at the rooming house. Now, Sarah is pretty sure that she knows this girl, but she can't place how she knows this girl. And so after she's done delivering the baby, she goes back home and she returns to the rooming house next day to take a look at her patient. And that's when she learns that this other girl that she had seen, she is dead, murdered. Now, Sarah gets really upset about the death and wants to know what happened. Now, Sarah discovers through her, uh, you know, uh, efforts, she discovers that this dead girl is a girl from a very prominent family in New York, and she's a sister to one of Sarah's old friends. Sarah is very high strung. She has a very um, like a typical heroine in a book. She has need to see the justice done. She sets out to find out who murdered this girl, and that quest leads her to meet up with Detective Sergeant Frank Malloy of the New York Police Department to solve this mystery. Now, obviously, there are hiccups in her way. Family of the dead girl, who are, like I mentioned earlier, are very prominent family in New York society. They don't want a scandal, so they don't want anybody to investigate. So they refuse to cooperate with her. Now, turn of the century wasn't a very bright time to be a police officer. The world was a very different place back then, which makes this investigation even harder. Um, overcome Coming all these multiple problems that Sarah and Frank, they still managed to solve the mystery of who murdered the girl, but only to realize that justice isn't always easy to dispense. Now, Victoria Thompson builds a world that is set in simpler times. It's very engaging. New York in the 1800s was a very different place and vastly different from the city that we see in our current police dramas or movies. The world was different. People had a different mindset. Technology was primitive, and even the police force was basically in its infancy. But even with all this, you do see some fine detective work being performed by Sarah and Frank. I loved reading this novel, so much so that I actually binge listened to the rest of the series. There are some 22 books in the series. And with each book, the main characters, the protagonists, Sarah and Frank, they grew more familiar. The whole gaggle of side characters that they have, which includes Mrs. Malloy, Mrs. Ellsworth, Gino, Maeve, Catherine, Brian, even Mr. and Mrs. Decker. So they all grow up on you. You start wanting to hear about them more and more with every new story. There is no fancy gadgetry, no crime scene investigation or the CSI or police procedures or no science stuff, no legal shenanigans. Basically anything and everything that makes current murder mysteries thrilling, all of it is absent. And even with that, the Gaslight Mystery series brings you pure joy. Um, I think it's very similar to what Sherlock Holmes does. Of course, Holmes was a genius and he was devoid of all human emotional entanglement. Sarah and Frank, on the other hand, are very personable characters. They have their flaws, they have their societal norms, and they have a lot of uh, kinks in them. But even with all these flaws, they are lovable. The character arcs of all these major characters that I listed before, it's a the arc of these characters is very wonderfully woven through the fabric of the main plot points. You know, so much so that you can read them out of the sequence. The books, the 22 books that you have in the series, you can read them out of sequence and you will still be able to bond with each of these characters from their own. In Gaslight Mystery series, I found a genre of fiction that I never thought I would enjoy reading. It's a similar feeling that I had felt when I first discovered Satyajit Ray's um, Feluda. So we'll talk about Feluda in some other episode in detail, but if you're not familiar with him, let me give you a brief introduction. Now, Feluda was a character that Satyajit Ray wrote. He wrote Feluda stories mainly for children. It was published in Sandesh, which was a weekly for children. And since it was written and published in 1960s, the premises of their stories is very, very clear. Basically, none of the stories have crimes of passion, so no love triangles, no betrayals, and no sexual nature. But even when with all those constraints, Feluda's stories were very captivating. I remember that I actually went on a Feluda binge when I discovered the them back in 90s when they were translated into English by Rupa and found them super engaging. Gaslight mysteries were not written for children, so they're basically filled with crimes of passion and society rules and betrayals. However, they also have this sense of simplicity in their execution. There's no tricky science to wrap your head around. Life was simpler in 1800s, but crimes were still colorful and very mysterious. I'm eagerly waiting to pick up the next installment in the series and get immersed in the world that is long past gone. Live the simpler life through the pages of this historical mystery series. And I would love if you could join me in reading it. Come on, let's live the simple life. Thank you for listening in today. It was wonderful to talk in your ears. I'm hoping that you enjoyed the episode and you are as excited as me to pick up the next book in the series to read. I hope that we will connect soon in the next episode. Till then, keep reading.